Welcome, welcome. Come on in. Welcome to the virtual college fair. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we get started as you're all coming on in. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type a question to our presenters at any time. Your camera and your microphone are off so the panelists cannot see you or hear you. This is just one of the many different sessions that is happening, so make sure to sign up for any additional sessions. This presentation is being recorded and will be available within about a week at the same website that you registered. So now I'd like to turn it over to our presenters.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I am going to share my screen to get our presentation started. So we are here today to talk about test optional and what it really means. I think for the Colleges That Change Lives organization, this is something that has been on our radar for over 20 years, but 2020 has really brought it to the forefront for all institutions. And I am here with Juniata College. We have Eckerd College represented as well as Clark University, and we will tell you kind of where we are in test optional, and we welcome your questions and encourage you to share those with us in the chat. So like I said, 2020 has brought a lot of changes, and one of those is that we know it is really tough for students right now to get into SAT or ACT testing sites. We've heard, frankly, horror stories about students traveling hours, traveling into different states, hoping to take the test, finding out the morning of that it's been canceled. And we have so much empathy for you. We know how stressful this time of year can be for seniors in general, and the issues with testing make it even more so. The good news is right now, more than 2/3 of four-year colleges and universities in the United States will not require that applicants submit ACT or SAT scores for fall 2021. So there are so many schools that are making changes in order to make this process easier for you this year and acknowledging how tough it is for you to get those ACT and SAT scores. I also want to take a moment to kind of define three different kinds of definitions as it relates under the test optional umbrella. The first is test optional, which truly means that it is up to you. It is optional for you to send or to not send your scores. You may have also heard something called test flexible, which lets students submit other scores in place of the SAT or the ACT, such as SAT subject tests, such as IB exam scores or AP scores. And lastly, you may hear the language test blind, which means that regardless of whether you send or don't send your scores, that school or institution is not going to look at them. So those are three different kinds of test policies that colleges and universities have. The three that you'll hear from today are all test optional, so truly just an option to you whether or not you send those. My first colleague here, Terry, is from Clark University, and she is going to tell you a little bit about her institution and their test optional policy.
Thanks, Molly. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in terms of your time zone. I guess it could be good evening also for some of our international friends. Welcome today. As Molly said, I work at Clark University. I am the director of the undergraduate admissions office. And just a very few quick things about Clark. We're located in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is the central part of Massachusetts. We have about 2,200 undergraduate students that come from all over the world, 15% international, and right now we have 45 states plus DC and Puerto Rico represented. And then if you're doing a lot of these Colleges That Change Lives sessions, you already know we're a small liberal arts college, so we're not going to go in depth there. But I did want to highlight one unique program at Clark, which is our accelerated bachelor and master's degree program. This is a program if you come as an undergrad and make a qualifying GPA, you can actually stay at Clark for a 5th year and earn a master's degree from the university without paying any tuition for the 5th year. And there's 14 different master's degrees available as part of that program, and about 1/3 of our students stay and do that program. So just a little bit about Clark, but we're going to talk now about our test optional policy. If you want to flip the slide, Molly.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So Clark has been test optional since the class that entered in the fall of 2013. So we've been doing this for a little while. We're very comfortable with making decisions without those test scores. We are test optional for all applicants, whether you're a first year or transfer, whether you're a homeschooled student or an international student. The one caveat for international students is why we're SAT, ACT optional. We do require for students whose native language is not English, some type of English language proficiency test. We try to be as flexible there as possible and accept things like TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo. We will occasionally accept the initial view interview. So again, trying to be as inclusive as possible in terms of how students can fill that particular test requirement. But in terms of SAT or ACT, it is the policy that everyone can take advantage of that opportunity. Our application is read on a holistic process, and test scores are actually not a part of the application rating rubric. Nowhere in the language that we use that determines how we rate a student does it mention test scores at all. Even students that submit them, it's more of a supplemental piece of application and not something that we're actually using in our rating. We are also test optional for merit scholarships. So not having a test score in no way will impact your eligibility to be considered for one of our range of merit scholarships. And that's our policy. And I think I'm handing it back over to Molly or John.
We're headed to Eckerd.
Eckerd.
Thank you, Terry and Molly. It's great to be with everybody today. My name is John Sullivan, and I am Vice President for Enrollment here at Eckerd. And Eckerd is located in St. Petersburg, Florida, on the Gulf Coast. That is an aerial view of our campus. We have about 1,900 students. And one of the unique programs we have is our marine science program. And sort of tied to that, I guess, is our pet-friendly policy, complete with if you graduate, your pet will also have a graduation ceremony. So Molly, do you mind changing the slide? Thank you. So we are the newbies to this in this small group of schools, in that we were doing it for the first time for the fall 2021 class. And ours truly is test optional, as both Molly and Terry have alluded to. You let us know if you want us to look at your scores, we will. If you do not want us to, we will not. And you can indicate that on your application for admission, and that's how we will know what your decision is on that. We do not have any test score requirements for any specific major, and our merit scholarships do not have test scores as part of the component to determine a merit scholarship based on academics. Much like Clark for the international students requiring English proficiency. And one side note for us in Florida, for any Florida students that are out there, that for Florida Bright Future scholarships, the state still does require that you submit your SAT or ACT results to qualify for those scholarships. And that certainly could be the case at other states as well. But Molly, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So I am here with Juniata College, which is just between Eckerd and Clark. So we are located in central Pennsylvania. This is also an aerial shot of our campus. Some things that kind of make Juniata unique: we're a small school, about 1,532 people. And my favorite thing about Juniata is that we don't have majors and minors. We have what we call the program of emphasis. And it is an opportunity for students and their two faculty advisors to create an academic plan that is flexible, that is unique, that meets the needs of individual students. And so one of my favorite programs, because you can create your own here, is called Global Gender Conflict. And I feel like if you were to Google that, you would probably not get any schools that have that particular program on the books. And yet at Juniata, that's something that you can create and try to be exactly what you want it to be, to kind of fulfill your passions that you have now, but also to think about what your next step is and what you see as career goals and sort of a lifelong path of continuing the work that you start at Juniata. We have been test optional since 1998, which it's crazy to me to think is older than many of the students tuning in are. That is mind blowing. But we've been down this road for many, many years. And like Clark, like Eckerd, we do holistic application review. That means that we actually read your application. It means that we read all of it. There's not a computer that is making those decisions for any of the schools represented today. We are making those decisions. And so as test optional at Juniata, you can choose to send your scores or to not send your scores. We are also happy as personal admissions counselors to help you with that decision, which can be nerve-wracking. If you tell me your score and we decide that it's not going to help you in the application process or in the financial aid process, I will tell you not to send it and I will wipe that information from my brain. For all three of the schools here today, the merit scholarships do not come from my wallet or John's wallet or Terry's wallet. Thank goodness, because we're all very generous with scholarships. And so we want to put you in a position that allows you to get the most merit scholarship, and we will help, and all to say we will help you make that decision about whether test optional is going to benefit you. We do not require any additional materials. This is something to keep in mind as you look at other institutions. Some may require you to send 2 graded papers, perhaps, from your high school experience. We do not ask for anything in lieu of your test scores. All of our test optional applicants qualify for all of our merit scholarships, just like you heard in the previous 2 institutions. So that will not help or hurt your merit scholarship consideration. And our policy applies to everyone, to first-year students, to transfer students, to homeschooled students, and international students alike. This is kind of a blanket policy for us. Some takeaways. Safety should be the paramount concern, not only of 2020, but as you move through the college search process in general. We talked about those horror stories at the beginning of the presentation. There is truly no reason for the 3 schools represented here today, and I think for the 2/3 of schools that are going to be test optional for the fall of 2021, for you to be traveling hours and out of state in order to take these tests. If you are able to do them, if your school is offering them or your school district is offering them and you can do so in a safe way and you want to take the tests, by all means, but you should not be risking your safety or the safety of your family to take those. Secondly, do your research. There's a lot of similarities between the test optional policies for Juniata, for Clark, for Eckerd, but there are also some nuances. And so this is an opportunity for you to dig in and to find out exactly what test optional means at different institutions. For some, you will need to send additional materials. For some, you may need to send AP scores or take or send your IB scores, or perhaps have an additional letter of recommendation. You might have to have a specific GPA in order to be able to apply test optional. You may learn at some institutions that applying test optional will take you out of the running for some specific scholarships. So while we don't want to add more to your plate, I would certainly encourage you to research those test optional policies. And this is an opportunity for students and for families to take an even more active role in communicating with the admissions counselors at the different institutions that you're interested in. I will speak for myself, Terry, and John in saying that the favorite part of our job is getting to speak with students and families. Those are the emails that I know I jump to first because they're much more exciting than the mundane work that's going on in our offices every day. So we want to connect with you. We want to share those experiences and answer the questions that you have. So don't hesitate to reach out with those. And then lastly, many schools are familiar reviewing test optional applications. And even for those that are new, like Eckerd, they're in good company with schools who have been doing this for 5, 10, 20 years. And we're sharing tips and tricks so that we can all read test optional applications in the most fair, unbiased way possible. John, Terry, do you have any other takeaways before I advance?
I think you summed it up well, Molly.
Awesome. So where can you find information to help you learn which schools are test optional? The first resource you'll see in the top right-hand corner, it's Fair Test. And Fair Test is a nonprofit organization that kind of collects information about schools that are test optional. Their mission statement reads, that fairtest.org advances quality education and equal opportunity by promoting fair, open, valid, and educationally beneficial evaluations of students, teachers, and schools. Fair Test works to end the misuses and flaws of testing practices that impede those goals. They place special emphasis on eliminating the racial, class, gender, and cultural barriers to equal opportunity posed by standardized tests and preventing their damage to the quality of education. You can go to fairtest.org, it's a free website, and you can find the list of schools. You can sort by state, you can sort by alphabet, region, to find out what schools' test optional policies are, and it will link you directly to that school's test optional policy page. If you're here today, it's because you're a fan of the Colleges That Change Lives, and you may not know that we actually have a college search tool on the CTCL website. So I've highlighted where you can find it, and then you can also search for test optional schools specifically with a filter on the college search page. I believe that 31 of our 45 CTCL schools are test optional at this point, and I only see that number rising. So that's a great resource as well. Other resources include Big Future on the College Board site. I think you can filter by test optional status there as well. Anything to add, Terry, John?
No, I think you're doing great.
Great. And we are happy to answer questions. I know we've gotten a few in the chat, and we're happy to answer more. So feel free to send them over. I will also share that when I applied to college 1,000 years ago, it was very early in the test optional kind of wave. And I remember getting my SAT scores back and thinking, what happened on that Saturday morning? I was a great high school student. I had a good GPA. I had a high class rank. I was doing well in my AP courses, and something about that SAT, the scores just did not translate. And so I am living proof that you can apply to college test optional, that you will be admitted. And I can tell you, since that time, not a single human has asked me what my SAT scores are. It's one of those things that feels so important in your life right now, and then it just like disappears as a question that people ask, or as a topic that even comes up in conversation. So do know, while it seems so important right now, it is one piece of the puzzle. A question about providing advice to juniors. John, Terry, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So the question has to do with, will schools continue, those that have jumped in, like Eckerd, as one of those. We're actually doing it as a 2-year pilot program. And many schools like us that have jumped in, I've seen 2 and 3 years, and some have gone, that they will continue it indefinitely at this point. So I think for juniors, if a school is doing it this year, more than likely, they'll be doing it next year.
And the other thing that I would add is that while many schools have become test optional because of the pandemic and the current situation, even before that, Fair Test had a very long list. I don't know if it was a half or what it was before that, but there was already a long list of schools that were test optional, and I'm sure will continue to test optional. I know when we started doing the research about 10 years ago to become test optional, at that time we looked, and I don't remember what number there were, but no school at that time who had ever gone test optional reversed it, because schools are finding they can make these decisions without. So I can't promise what the future leads, but I can say that every school that I know about who has ever gone test optional is still test optional today. And I don't think that some of the concerns that schools have had with the test and some of the stuff that Molly read in the Fair Test mission statement, that stuff's not going away. So I think it's safe, besides some schools that have very specific guidelines about it being a pilot program, but I'll be willing to bet that most of them stay test optional also.
And I would add that many of the schools that are going test optional for the first time for the fall 21 year have been wanting to do this for many years, and COVID gave them the opportunity to go to their faculty or to their board and to their senior leadership teams to say, now is the moment that we have to do this. And so I think there are many of the schools that are getting there now have been asking for this for quite some time. We have a question about, will it hurt or help me if I send in lower than average or mediocre SAT, ACT scores? I would say a great resource is to use the Big Future site on the Big Future page on the College Board website, because they show pretty accurate averages for SAT and ACTs, and they show a range. And so I would say at Juniata, our average SAT score is a 1260. I would say if you have below an 1100, we should have a conversation about taking those. So I would say, think about it kind of as standard deviations, or think about it as 100 or 150 point chunks. If you're 100, 150, 200 points below the average at Juniata, I would not recommend sending them.
The only thing I'll add is at Clark, because test scores are not part of our rating rubric at all, it's not going to hurt you. It's also not going to help you, though. Students that submit really low test scores, we try really hard just to pretend we didn't see them. But you can't always ignore them. So I agree with Molly's advice. For each individual school you're looking at, what score you choose to send might be a little different, and you might look and say, okay, Juniata's average is 1260, Clark's average is about 1280. I'm not positive what Eckerd is, and I have a 1200. And so maybe because it's in that 100 range, you send it to all of them. But if there's another school that has a 1350 average, you might choose not to submit that. You can make different choices for individual schools. You might choose to submit your test score some places and not others, and that's 100% okay.
And I guess I would just also add is that if you're able and your school has college counselors available to help you as well, they may have history with the schools that you're looking at. And I think, as Molly stated earlier in the presentation, this is really a time for you to develop that relationship with your schools. We are 3 of many who are test optional, and as she mentioned, there are some nuances. So we would hate to mislead you about a school that none of us work at. So that's one of our challenges within the admission process in general, is lots of times you have to check specifically with each school about what their policy might entail.
A question about whether our campuses are open for in-person tours. Juniata is open for in-person tours. Our student body is back at about 95% capacity. So we are welcoming visitors. We have 6 open spots a day, and you would be given a one-on-one tour with one of our current students on campus. We would ask that you wear a mask and practice social distancing where possible. And then we are also doing interviews on campus, also wearing a mask and socially distanced. But certainly we invite you to come join us. We also have a ton of virtual opportunities. You can sit in on classes virtually. You can meet with faculty virtually. Anything that you want to do, we can help connect you to.
Clark is also open physically with students on campus. 80% of our students chose to return to campus, and 20% are remote only. We did open actually just this past week for in-person tours. We are doing, similar to Molly, pretty limited numbers, 1 tour guide per family, so you're not going around in groups. We're not doing any information sessions, so it is trying to minimize the contact with visitors. Our tours do not go into any buildings right now, so it walks around campus. You'll see buildings, you'll see students, but you won't go into any physical spaces besides the visitor center. And that's the only thing we're offering right now online or in person. Everything else, including interviews and info sessions, are online. And we actually next week are kicking off a month-long webinar event called Clarktoberfest, where every single day has a webinar on a different topic, from study abroad to academics to student life. And so we're really excited. We'd much rather have people come to campus and do a big open house, but we're excited to find other opportunities to connect.
And we are also having visitors on campus. We have 9 spots a day, individual appointments, tours, excuse me, and then you would sit down with an admission rep afterwards if you wanted to. We changed our academic calendar for this year, so we have about half of our students currently on campus, and then towards the middle of October, the rest of the students who wish to come back will come back. So we're staging the return of our students. And as both Molly and Terry have said, there are a number of virtual opportunities online for you to get to know your admission rep and other people on our campus.
And I would encourage you, when you're looking to visit any institution right now, to read their policies. I know that for us, if you're coming from a red or an orange county, as sort of distinguished by the Harvard map, we are asking that you not come to campus. If you're in a yellow or a green county, we welcome you to campus. So I would just look at those rules and regulations to make sure that you know, if you're able to visit, what's expected of you. Most of us will probably also have a survey that will ask you to fill out about your, like a health questionnaire. So just taking not only your safety into account, but also the safety of our faculty, staff, and students.
I'll add to what Molly said in terms about checking school policies about who may and may not. You can also check state policies. Right now, Massachusetts has from, I believe right now it's 40 different states. You either have to quarantine for 14 days, which is not reasonable if you're just coming to visit a campus tour, or you have to take the COVID test before you leave home and come with your negative results, and they have to be within 48 hours of your coming to the state. So in addition to school policies, check state and local policies about who's allowed to visit those areas right now. I know that's a lot to try to balance when you just want to visit a campus, but again, we have these policies in place to keep everybody, you as well as our own communities, safe and healthy.
And if you have questions, contact us. We know those policies backwards and forwards, so we're happy to walk you through those, just like we would a test optional policy. We have a question from a student who says, I haven't heard any reason so far to send a test score. What would be a reason to send a test score?
Well, I think I'll take a stab at it and you guys can jump in as well. But, you know, one would be is if there are any requirements at your state level for scholarships like there is in Florida, we're going to need those sooner or later if you want to be considered for that. A strong test score can also sometimes help if academically you've had some bumps in the road on your transcript. And this might be, you know, a stabilizing feature to demonstrate, you know, some of your skills and some of your abilities in that way. So those would be a couple of reasons that I would suggest you do that.
I would say I am a horrible singer, and so I would never submit an application to anything saying that I'm a great singer. I am a great cook, so if I could put that on an application, I would. And so that's to say, if you are someone who excels in taking standardized tests and you've had the opportunity or will have the opportunity to take them, and your scores are the national average or above or in line with the scores that or the averages that the colleges that you're looking at have, then why not send them, right? If you've done the work and that's a place where you excel, that's a great opportunity to brag that that's a place that you excel. Next question, for schools that have lower acceptance rates that are test optional this year, is there a downside to not submitting a test score versus sending one?
I think, unfortunately, the answer to that question is probably it depends, and it's going to depend on the school versus your circumstances. I know that there are some schools that have gone test optional, but say if you have had the opportunity to take the test, you should submit the scores. And I know that's a really confusing message. So I think that you might, if you're applying to schools that have pretty low acceptance rates that are more selective, I would say reach out to those individual schools, explain your circumstances. If it's a matter of you haven't been able to take the test, I think that those schools have been very clear that that's not going to hurt them, hurt you. But if it's a matter of I have test scores but they're a little bit lower, should I still submit them at those particularly highly selective schools? I think you might have to reach out to those schools to get the best possible answers.
It's definitely a nuanced topic of conversation, and I think it's a question of what is a low acceptance rate, right? If is 50% low, and when you get down to the single digits, anything below a 10% acceptance rate, I don't know that your score really mattered. I think there's so much that goes into that decision-making process. And we and the whole CTCL organization do not fall into that category. So we are looking for reasons to admit you. And sometimes your scores are just an extra check in that box for us. We're rarely looking for a reason to deny you. That's why we've chosen these schools. Feel free to put any other questions that you may have in the Q&A box. Thanks for hanging out with us this afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Does CTCL have a filter for schools who super score? Great question. I don't think that there is one on that college search database on our website, but I know Juniata super scores.
Clark does as well.
We do too.
I think most schools do super score.
Yes.
If they don't, they should. Super score, great question. What is super score? Super score would mean if you took the SAT on 2 separate dates, and on the first date that you took it, you got a high score on the reading section, and on the second date, you got your best math score on that date. We would take your best reading score and your best math score and create a total score, or that super score, regardless of whether those scores happen on the same day or on different days. So it's taking your best performance in every section, regardless of the test date, and adding those together. A question about if the PSAT is optional this year at a particular high school, would you recommend taking the PSAT? What if it's a health risk for student or family?
I'm going to answer the second part of that first. If it is a health risk for you or somebody you live with to take the PSAT, don't put anybody in. Going back to the takeaways, safety first. So I'll tackle that one right away. If there's a compromised health situation, answer no. Just in general, would I recommend it? The important part of PSAT is the P stands for practice. This is a practice SAT. There are other ways you can practice. You can take practice tests online through Khan Academy and things like that. So again, I would weigh the benefits of going into something that might be more like the real life situation of a test score with the health and safety of you and your loved ones and the people that you live with. And if the health and safety is more important, again, don't take it. You can also ask questions of your high school about what they are doing to make it as safe as possible there. Will the desks be, how far apart will desks be? How many people will be in a room? Are masks required for the entire time that you're taking tests? What about breaks? What about those kind of things? And if you're not satisfied with the answers that you're getting to, again, feel safe and comfortable, don't do it. But it really will be a personal choice that individuals will have to make based on their own circumstances. But I think those are some of the questions you can ask yourself as you make that decision.
And the other piece that sometimes comes out of the PSAT is you're able to, as you complete the registration form, submit your information to be shared with colleges that might be a good match for you, if you will. But there are many other ways in which you can get on college lists. And so, just recognize that you will have to go at it a little bit differently, but it's not impossible by any means to, of course, get in touch with us.
Absolutely. This question reads, should we take the ACT in October, even if we decide to apply early action? Most of the deadlines are November 1st, but it can take 2 to 8 weeks for the scores to come back in. What do we think? I will say that whether you're applying on the Common App or the Coalition app, you can tell us that you're taking the test and it will actually ask for the date. So if you were to submit your application to Juniata today, you can tell us that you're going to take the SAT on October, whatever, 7th, 5th, and we will see that, and then we will wait to read your application until we receive those scores.
The other thing I'll say at Clark is that there are often things that might come in a little bit past the deadline, you know, a second letter of recommendation that we don't require, but is submitted anyways. And at Clark, until we finalize a decision, we will look at anything new that comes in, even if we already have read the application within our system. The application gets flagged and we know there's something new in there, whether it's a new updated test score, whether it's an extra recommendation or something else has happened. Updated senior year grades could have come in since we read the application. So until we finalize a decision, which for us doesn't happen until about 2 or 3 days before we release a decision. So if we're going to release I'm going to make up a date, if we're going to release December 15th, anything that comes in until a couple days before that will be considered. So if you feel comfortable taking the ACT, you think that it's something that might help you at the particular schools you're applying to, most schools I think will still be able to look at them, especially if you indicate within your application you will be taking it, because the school will know to watch for that.
I also would share that this is not all based in like human behavior, right? There are so many computer systems that we're all using that help us to remember that you told us you're going to take the test in October and not to read your application without those scores. There's so many computer systems that are far above my understanding of technology that automatically attach your scores to your application when they come in. So much of this is happening behind the scenes based on identifying information that it's happening really quickly, and it takes human error out of the picture to a large extent. This question reads, what if we're applying EA and taking a test in October, but don't know if we want to submit scores yet? I would say that's very normal, especially if you haven't taken the PSAT or this is your first time taking the SAT. When you fill out your SAT registration, you can add schools that you automatically want to get sent those scores, or you can leave that section blank and choose to send them afterwards. So perhaps if you're not sure what you ultimately want to do, then you can leave that section blank. When you get your scores back, you can then make the decision about whether or not to send them. I would also say that I have had many students who have applied thinking, yes, I think the SAT went well and I plan on sending my scores. They get their scores back, they're not as happy with them. All you need to do is send an email and say, I'd prefer to apply test optional, and we literally click a button and you're now applying test optional. So it's really not hard. We just need you to tell us if your plan has changed. And if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that plans change. You can also, for Juniata, I don't know about Eckerd and Clark, you can have your school counselor send your SAT scores. So don't tell the College Board, but you don't have to pay to send those scores.
That is true at Clark as well. And we'll actually do self-reported from the student as well if they send the screenshot. So it can come from the counselor at your school on your transcript, or for us directly from you if you'd send it as a screenshot with your score report. So definitely if you want us to send the scores, we want you to be able to do it in the easiest way possible.
Agreed.
This is a question about whether not taking the SATs or the ACTs will have any effect on the post-graduation process. For example, going to veterinary school. Literally, no one will care about your SAT scores, which is wonderful after you get into college, if you even choose to send them. So there's a whole nother set of tests coming if you're thinking about veterinary school. Luckily, you have a few years before you'll need to take those. The next question asks if we have any tips for college interviews.
So I guess I'll start. And one, I think first of all would be to understand whether they are, again, required or recommended or even available at your schools. And if they're available but not required, I think again, it's just like deciding whether to send your test scores or not. Do you have, are you ready for this? Are you, interested in engaging in this way? Are you able to tell your story to probably a stranger? Maybe you've met them virtually or something. You might have met us on the road in the past, but there's a little bit less of that for this year. So I think thinking about that, and then also maybe even, many schools will, put some tips on their website, and think about what questions you want answered. It really is at least the way we do it, it really is a conversation with us and the student to understand what are you looking for in a school, and how do we match or not match, and more ideas for you to think about from that perspective.
Yeah, I agree with everything John said. The only thing I'm going to add, and this is more of because of the current situation we're in, you might not be sitting in a room with the person, you might be doing it via Zoom. We are all working in unusual circumstances. I am in my house right now, not my office. And I have a dog, and it is quite possible that the dog could start barking right now. We also understand that is true for you as the student. I was interviewing a student the other day, and they had a little brother who fell and started to cry, and he's like, "I'm so sorry." It's like, that's okay. First of all, is your brother okay? But it's like, there are other distractions when interviewing in this kind of setting that we are all very aware of. And don't disconnect from that Zoom thinking it was awful because the dog barked or the baby cried or the telephone rang or whatever happened. We are all human, and we are all in this together.
And we all have technical difficulties. So, queen of it here, if your Zoom, if the Zoom shuts down or your video isn't working or your audio is being silly, whatever it is, like, we understand that too. It's happening to us as much as it's happening to you. I think the interviews can also be really fun. So while I like to ask questions about, your greatest achievement in high school and what's been a hardship that you've experienced, I also like to know what you're watching on Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus or whatever streaming service you use. I want to get to know you a little bit. And so they can be fun as well. We have a few minutes left. If you have any other questions, now would be a good time to get them in the chat. It doesn't look like anything's coming in yet. I'm glad we were able to answer everyone's questions.
While we wait to see if there's any last minute questions, I think that Molly and John will agree with me that we put our email addresses up here for a very specific reason. We want to hear from you. So if you have other questions about this topic or general college search questions, we can happily answer those. And of course, if you have questions about our particular schools, please reach out to us. We are here and happy to help.
Thank you for your time this afternoon. We know that there are so many ways to be spending your time right now, and I think this is a really productive way to spend that time. Question, can a very strong interview make a difference for a student who had unusual circumstances impacting high school grades, etc., so the student can share those circumstances? 100%. Like 2 thumbs up, more if I had more thumbs. Anytime that you can tell us more details, what we don't probably want to hear is that you had a bad teacher or that, it's better to take responsibility for those grades than it is to kind of pawn off that responsibility on other people. This question says, is it always okay to communicate with your admission counselor, especially with questions about the school? Yes, please. Please talk to us. As John alluded to, we would normally be not at home in the month of September, October. We'd be traveling the country. I would be in California right now, so I'm sad about that, not dipping my toes in the Pacific Ocean this year. But we want to hear from you, and we know that there are so many resources, and we want you to take advantage of them, and we are one of those resources.
Thank you everyone for joining us. When you close this window, there will be a link for a very quick 4-question survey. We'd appreciate any feedback that you can provide. Also, this was just one of many sessions being hosted, so make sure to sign up for additional sessions. In about a week, you'll be able to find this session's recording as well as all of the other session recordings on the website in which you registered. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.